With Elestrals First Edition almost here, I thought it'd be a great time to revisit an old video idea I did, that being discussing the different start decks that come with First Edition, but updating it to be more relevant with the knowledge I've gained and just more polished overall. I'll be breaking down the star decks into 4 main points. The first one being, what playstyle do I think best suits the deck? The second one being, how good is the deck both from a power level standpoint as well as the ability to teach a player the game? The third point is the version exclusives to those starter decks, because that is important for the fourth point especially, that being a buyer's guide. But before I get into the first starter deck, I think it's important to say if one starter deck catches your eye above all else, doesn't matter what the reason is, pick it up. Go with that one. I don't think this information is too relevant for anyone that just has a gut feeling towards one. That choice will always serve you the best when trying to pick up a brand new game, and I don't think Elestrals is any different. I think the best place to start is the first start deck, that being Centaurbor, primarily focused around Earth. This start deck, I think the play styles that best suited are tempo or mid-range. And what that means is, for tempo, that you want to set the pace of the game early on and ride that pace all the way to victory. That's a very broad definition, but pretty much it just heavily encourages you just to kind of play out your cards, attack, and just keep pushing the opponent turn after turn. It'll make more sense as you start playing it. As for mid-range, that just means this deck can easily pivot between being more offensive and a bit more control-oriented depending on what the matchup dictates, and you'll know which one to go with once you start learning matchups. That's a more advanced skill, but just know that it's really hard to truly mess up playing this deck from a broad fundamentals standpoint. As for how good the start deck is, I think it's one of the best, if not the best one. This is because this deck is pretty simple, straightforward. The play style is heavily benefited by the fundamentals of the game, on top of just having some really powerful cards that are seeing meta play currently. But I think those points are second to how well does this deck teach the game to new players, and I think it's the best one. The playstyle itself lends very well to teaching the general flow of the game, and then all the cards in here teach different aspects and core components of the game, just for an overall, I think, great learning experience. Where this deck does lose some points in being able to teach the game is it really doesn't teach much of the breadth of the game. There's a lot more out there that just isn't covered in this deck that are more advanced techniques, so I don't want to fully dock this deck, but there definitely are decks that show those limits a lot better. As for the version exclusives, we got the main Ascension line of Sprouter, September, and Centaurbor, Giraflora, as well as the Divine Rune Demeter and the Counter Rune Poison Tipped Arrow. Though some additional notes, Demeter does receive a full art printing in the main booster set, but again, that's a once per box card with a ton of different options, so you're definitely not guaranteed to pull that one. And Giraflora here, while being exclusive to the starter deck in first edition, it is getting a reprint in Frostfall to pair with its new Ascension, which has been revealed. Finally, my recommendations for the people who should be picking up this starter deck are the people who do want to play meta, first and foremost, or at least optimize their decks the best they can, because Poison Tipped Arrow here is looking to be a staple card for first edition, with all the top decks in the most recent tournaments running at least 2 copies of it, if not 3. Now, I think you can easily get away with 2 copies of this card, so just picking up one of this deck gets you those 2 copies, which is perfect. Now, will there probably be some reprints of this card? Yeah, Dan's gone on the record saying that he wants to make sure cards are accessible. When that will happen, I don't know. Maybe in Shattered Stars, but again, that's a more limited release, and that's probably going to be a holo. So if you want them right now and don't want to have to wait for a reprint, just pick up 1 copy of the star deck, and you got them. Demeter is another notable one for the meta because Earth Beatdown is very relevant right now, and it runs 3 copies of this, and since the star deck is the most accessible product to get the Demeters, since it's the only base rarity printing of it, you will want to pick up at least 1 to get the 2, but you really do want the 3, meaning you'll have to pick up 2 copies of the star deck to get it. Also think it's worth noting that Demeter is probably going to be a core piece for Earth moving forward, since it is the divine rune for the element. So if you really want to play Earth at any point in the future of Elestrals, I said history, future of the Elestrals, I think you'll want to pick up 2 star decks to make sure you have your playset of Demeter. Again, like Poison Tipped Arrow, this will probably get reprinted, but when and how accessible is to be determined. This one will also just be a general note for any of these starter decks, but if the play style, any of the cards in here just seem appealing to you, that's a perfectly acceptable reason to just pick this one up, no questions asked. And finally, if you have any interest in playing Centaurbor, you will want to pick up a copy of this deck since Centaurbor is exclusive to it. Now note, you do only get one of the Centaurbor and only 2 of the September, so you will need to pick up multiple copies to be able to complete playsets. But of note here, depending on how you want to build Centaurbor, you can easily get away with 1 copy or even 2 copies, depending on what your budget is and if you really don't want to pick up 3 copies of the deck. The next starter deck I want to cover is the Trifernal starter deck, primarily featuring fire. The playstyle of this deck is all over the place, and not in a good way. This is a general thing for fire where they just have a lot of playstyles going on that don't overlap with each other at all, and the starter deck perfectly exemplifies it. Got some great aggressive stuff with Nekruff and Blazerous here. You've got some more control tools with Wormmite, Flaraki, and Kinleo. Well, Kinleo can also be used offensively, but nonetheless, there's some points there. And really what kind of teeters this deck away from being able to play more mid-range like the Earth deck can with these aggro and control tools is that it has a small mill package here in Humbust and Cinder thrown in, which operates on a completely different axis than the rest of this deck. Oh, and I almost forgot to boot. You also have Burn in here, which can pair nicely with control and aggro, but especially with mill, again, just 2 completely opposite axes of functioning toward trying to get to 2 different win conditions that just doesn't mesh well. But in terms of learning the game, this deck actually does a lot. It teaches you a lot of different aspects and strategies that can exist in this game. Just, I mentioned some of them alone, such as aggro, control, and mill and burn. So in that regard, you get a taste of a bunch of stuff to see which one do you might want to build around, which I don't think is a bad thing, even if you're probably not winning with this deck because it's such a disjointed cluster. And I'm probably making it seem worse than it actually is. You can still pick up this deck and learn the game no problem whatsoever. Again, I just don't think it's the best. As for the exclusive cards, we have a few less than the Centaurbor one. For the Elestrals, we've got Humbust. For the runes, we have Hephaestus and Gorgon's Gaze. Just like Demeter, I want to make a special note for Hephaestus because this is the easiest printing to get of it, while the main set does have a full art version. Again, it's a full art, so it is not easily pulled and will be a bit more expensive to pick up. Wrapping up the Trifernal starter deck with the Buyer's Guide, we have to discuss Gorgon's Gaze here, because this is looking to be a 3-of staple for the foreseeable future. We see this in the topping decks where they have this card maxed out, and it's not hard to see why. No other card quite has the utility and does what Gorgon's Gaze does. Just being able to stop an Elestral's effect during the opponent's turn is a very important point of interaction. Now, unfortunately, this card only comes at 2 copies, meaning you will have to pick up 2 of the Trifernal starter deck just to get your playset of this card. Though, it doesn't feel too bad when you also have really great staples such as Earthquake and Tsunami also in there. But if you're fine with just the 2 copies, you're not looking to really play competitive at such a level where you need them, or you're not worried about optimizing your deck to its fullest and are fine waiting for reprints, you can always just pick up one of the starter deck as well. If you really like fire and plan to play it, you might also want to pick up 2 of the starter deck to get your Hephaestuses the easiest you can, though this card will probably be reprinted in the future as well. And right now it doesn't look like there's any standout fire decks, especially none that are running Hephaestus, at least in first edition. So you can totally wait, just pick up 1 and wait for the Hephaestus reprint if you don't want to buy 2 of this deck. And if you're interested in playing mill, pick up 2 copies of this deck to get your playset of Humbust. It's really hard to say that you can play mill without the max playset, as this is our most powerful mill tool as of current, and you really do need to find it, so you need to max this card out. And as I mentioned with the Centaurbor starter deck, if anything else from this deck just appeals to you, just pick it up. There's no really wrong reason to pick up any of the decks here. Next up, we've got the Majesea starter deck, which features primarily water. I think this is one of the stronger starter decks of the bunch here. Its primary playstyle is Stall and Burn. You can kind of see with the higher stat lines of the cards in here. And then we've got Krakatuga and Eruptions, there it is, which we saw in the Trifernal starter deck, which just can burn you for spirits. And that really bodes well for the starter deck, as the 2 playstyles really do complement each other very well. And as for how good it is, that synergy between Stall and Burn that I mentioned earlier does make this one of the stronger starter decks, as it has a clear path to victory. Just kind of wall up, stall out your opponent until they're on low spirits, and you can just burn them for game. Where this deck does lose points though is that it is a bit more difficult to learn and pilot, just due to the nature of having to stall out the opponent and know when to time your effects a bit more effectively to get the most value out of them, because you're not getting that inherent value of being able to attack. That does provide a lot for a lot of decks. But if that is your cup of tea, this can be a great challenge. and it can still teach you the game just fine, just more in an indirect kind of way. The exclusive cards for the starter deck are the Oistress here, as well as the Poseidon. I don't really have too much to say about Oistress as of current, but with Poseidon, just like the other Divine Runes, it is exclusive at an easy to get rarity in only this product, as the base set only has the full art. This buyer's recommendation is going to be a lot shorter than the previous ones because there aren't any really notable version exclusives other than the Poseidons for all the water casters out there that want water. But on that note, if you do want to play water, this is great. You just get a lot of great tools that water players will want in Foamy, Sluggle, Aphros, Molstachian, and Galaxy, as well as the Tsunamis, Poseidons, Triant Locks. Yeah, all this water stuff here is super important if that element is of interest to you, or if the playstyle is just interesting. Burn's pretty cool. You also get a great starting point for Burn. Nearing the end here, we've got the 4th starter deck in Ohmperial, primarily featuring Thunder. This deck's primary playstyle is control, meaning that you are trying to control different aspects of the game in your favor. I think this is a strong deck, just held back a bit by a few clunky cards. Though I also think it is one of the most difficult to learn, maybe just behind the Majesea start deck in some respects. In other respects, I do think that this one is a bit more difficult, and that's just due to the control nature of this deck. Control, you really need to understand the fundamentals of the game to know how to control them in your favor. Meaning this deck does have a high skill ceiling to be able to effectively pilot, and effectively piloting it is huge because the more effective you can use your control tools, the more value you get out of it, the better off you are in a game itself. That being said, I still think you can easily learn the game with this deck. It just takes a more indirect approach to get there, and I do think you'll be learning a lot every single game as you try your different control tools out at different moments to see what works the most effective and what does not. As for the version exclusive cards, we've got Toxionn and Galvenom here, and for the runes, we have the Zeus. Zeus, same thing like all the other Divine Runes, you got a full art printing in 1st edition, but this is the easiest place to get it. Zeus also transitions us perfectly into the buyer's guide because pretty much anyone who wants to play Thunder will want to pick up 2 of this to get their playset of Zeus, and anyone who's interested in playing meta probably also wants to pick this up as well because Thunder Nexus is looking to be one of the best decks at current, and you'll want your playset of Zeus. Heck, even some non-Thunder decks are just splashing in Zeus because they have a way to search out Divine Runes. They can just pick up a Zeus, and sinking Elestral by 3 attack, 3 defense is very strong, enabling you to hit over your opponent's bodies more easily. And this product's also just great for getting you started with Thunder Nexus with 2 Sparkit and 2 Astrabbit, 2 of the core components of the deck in terms of Elestrals, as well as having Toxionn here, which doesn't always see play in Thunder Nexus, but definitely is an option here. Astrabbit's also a great pickup as this is looking to be the best Elestral in the game currently, with more than just Thunder playing this card because of how good it is. I mean, it's a big body that replaces itself with a top 3 search, not even a draw that is repeatable. And with all the other star decks, if there's anything else about this deck that seemed appealing with you, just go for it, pick it up. Maybe you like the challenge of having to master control, even though it might be a bit difficult to learn, or who knows, maybe that just teaches you it better than some of the more straightforward decks such as Earth. Finally, we have the Penterror starter deck featuring Wind. The primary playstyles of this deck is Toolbox through the use of the Divine Rune Aeolus being able to search out any 1-cost Wind enchanted Elestral. And Toolbox is pretty vague, but really this deck can easily be played in a multitude of strategies just all enabled by this Aeolus. Though of note, I imagine that most of the time this deck will be played pretty combo or mid-range. Combo meaning that you're trying to assemble a combo of cards just to get a huge payoff once you do assemble them, and mid-range we discussed earlier, it can pretty much play more control or a bit more aggressively as the matchup dictates. As for how good this deck is, I think it's the best right up there with the Centaurbor starter deck, and actually complements it really well, because while Centaurbor lacks in teaching kind of the breadth of the game, all the crazy stuff you can do, this deck does that in spades. But at the cost of maybe not teaching the fundamentals as effectively as that the Centaurbor starter deck does. That doesn't mean I don't think this deck doesn't teach the fundamentals well, because I actually do think it does. The biggest downside I see with this deck is I think it'll just be overwhelming at times with all the options you have access to. The version exclusives for this deck is the main Ascension line of Hydrate, Twindra, and Penterror, and for the runes, we've got Resting on Your Laurels as well as the Divine Aeolus. Same thing as all the other Divines. Aeolus, this is the easiest place to get it, so if you want your playset, you probably want to pick up 2 copies of this. Laurels is a fantastic card to transition over to the buyer's guide because this card is looking to be a staple. Thankfully at 2 copies, though some decks are running 3, but I think you can easily get away with 2, and that's a-okay, so you only need to pick up 1 star deck for that reason. As you could guess, removal is just good, and this is cheap removal. Earthquake is a bit better in that regard because it doesn't have the condition that Laurels does, but it seems like this card is still good enough, even with that condition, to see play. And what's better than 3 invoke speed removal cards? 5 or even 6. And of course, if you want to play Wind, you do want to pick up 2 copies of this deck to get your Aeolus. I really do think you want the 3 copies just to enable that toolbox right now. Though if you're not looking to optimize, you can easily get away with just the 2 copies right now until it receives a reprint. You also want to pick this up if you want to play Penterror, just like the Centaurbor. You only get the 1 Penterror and the 2 Twindras, just like the Centaurbors and Centaurbor. But I also think these ratios are fine with what this deck wants to do, just because the Hydrate gets you into the Twindra easily, Twindra gets you into the Penterror easily, and once you get up to that, either you're winning off of that, or it gets answered, and you're hoping that your opponent's answer is too expensive for them to still win the game on the crackback, and you get a chance to win on your crackback. I really want to stress this point again. If there's anything about any of the starter decks that appeal to you that was not mentioned in this video, go for that starter deck. Really, it's that feeling first that will get you hooked on this game, and there isn't too much of a difference between all these different starter decks that I think one will just ruin the game experience for you. Not at all. They will all be very enjoyable to start playing with. The goal of this video was just to provide you all with more information if you're unsure which ones you do want to pick up, as well as just some additional buyer's information for those of you who want to make sure you're getting the cards that you will need moving forward. But now I want to hear from you all. Which starter deck or decks do you plan on picking up and why? If you've enjoyed this video, please consider leaving a like, subscribing, and turning on the notification bell so you're notified when I do upload more content. But with all that being said, look forward to more content coming out real soon.